really excited to talk about media nihilism and our solution of intergenerational discussion. Just a quick introduction. My name is Alyssa Backnell, and I work at Minneapolis Community and Technical College as a librarian and instructor. And I have been teaching research skills and research methods courses for over 10 years.
And hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca March. I also work at Minneapolis College with Alyssa. Minneapolis is the short. It used to be called MCTC. They don't want us to call it that, so now we call it Minneapolis College. I'm a librarian, and I also teach in the information literacy and library technology programs with Alyssa. And I've been there a little bit less than time than Alyssa, probably about 10, 11 years. And I'm excited to be here.
All right, we are going to start out with asking for your participation a little bit. Who are you? Are you an educator, librarian, parent, concerned citizen? Why are you here today? You can go ahead and chat your responses to us. We're just curious. Oh, somebody says chat is disabled.
Yeah, it's just because I'm on two computers and it says it's disabled from a participant viewpoint.
So
okay. Okay, there we go.
Okay, there we go. All right, we got some librarians.
Educator, academic librarian, librarian and concerned citizen. Good. And if you want to tell us, okay, Gen X librarian. If you want to tell us your generation, you don't have to, but if you feel like it, just let us know. And it's hard to see on this little picture, but they have the years of, okay, Gen X, lots of Gen Xers. Gen Z. Oh, Gen Z. Okay.
Ooh, hey.
Okay.
Got some younger people here. Excellent.
Millennial. Oh, hi, Paul. X. Generation X. X.
Wonderful.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Okay, moving right along. How are the kids? What is nihilism? According to Merriam-Webster, nihilism is the belief that traditional morals, ideas, beliefs, etc., have no worth or value. The belief that a society's political and social institutions are so bad they should be destroyed. Now, this quote, while bleak, is not entirely hopeless. I see some resilience here and an individual's desire to keep working hard and achieve something which is present in the vast majority of my students. But there is a skepticism about the institutions in American society and a skepticism about our ability as Americans to pull together and work towards something. This college student names fascism as a threat. They see oppression and oppressors clearly in our society. As a teacher and a mother, my heart goes out to this generation. The world they are entering is chaotic in a lot of ways that are new to their elders. And we elders feel exasperated by emerging technologies, news media, and American politics. It's difficult for us to explain why this reality exists, and it's difficult to see good solutions, but we elders have a responsibility to our children to be brave and offer hope. When I need some inspiration for how an educator fights oppression, I go back to Paulo Freire. This mid-20th century educator theorized dialogic education as an act of transcendence. And we educators take class discussion for granted in the 21st century, but in Freire's time, lectures were the dominant mode of education. He theorized the classroom dialogue as a place where students and educators could discuss the most important problems in their society and propose solutions together. Critical dialogue is a way for us to name our oppression, to see reality more clearly, and to exercise our imagination so that we see a future that is better. If we can't dream the new reality, we won't get there. So I like to start conversations about news media with my students by introducing epistemology. The term epistemology comes from the Greek words epistema and logos. Epistema can be translated as knowledge, understanding, acquaintance, while logos can be translated as account, argument, reason, study. Each of these translations captures a different meaningful facet of the Greek terms, and taken together, you can see how a wide-ranging study of epistemology can be. Plato's and Socrates' epistemology was an attempt to understand what it was to know, and how knowledge, unlike mere true opinion, is good for the knower. The subsequent philosophers, scientists, and academics have expanded this field greatly, giving us great insight into knowledge creation, dissemination, and production. This presentation is keenly focused on the problems of skepticism, but that is intrinsically tied to our understanding of knowledge, belief, and truth. So according to the Greeks, a belief can be understood as an expression of faith or trust in a person, power, or entity. A belief does not have to be true. Truth can be seen as generally agreed upon by specific communities. And this notion sounds postmodern, like something theorized in the 1970s, but the ancient Greeks understood this to be true in their time too. Humans create truth together. Knowledge, according to Socrates, is a true belief with an account. And this means that knowledge has a logical justification for why. Communities who care about knowledge creation spend a great deal of time talking about how they know something to be true. In the academy, we use scientific research methods to verify and justify our knowledge. In other communities, there may be different sets of ethical principles or investigative methods that justify their knowledge. And in all knowledgeable communities, there is a body of knowledge known to be true. And further knowledge comes out of sanctioned research methods and investigative approaches. So I have a question for the audience now. How do we know when something is true in today's media landscape? Go ahead and type into the chat your sources of truth or information. Maybe add in how you evaluate if something is true. Do we have any?
Looking at source, compare across multiple sources,
Okay.
confirmed by multiple sources. I see it in many places, if I see it in many places.
Yeah.
Verifiable by multiple sources, has video recording.
Excellent. I like this.
Okay.
Okay.
Verifiable by multiple sources, yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for participating. We will get back to that in a little bit. So in 2017, Cory Doctorow wrote an interesting blog post about propaganda. However, I believe his best insight was about the epistemological, or rather his epistemological explanation for how people approach news consumption. He identified two media epistemologies and describes them like this. The establishment version of epistemology, is we use evidence to arrive at the truth, vetted by independent verification. But trust us when we tell you that it's all been independently verified by people who were properly skeptical and not the bosom buddies of people they were supposed to be fact-checking. The alternative facts epistemology method goes like this. The independent experts who were supposed to be verifying the evidence-based truth were actually in bed with the people they were supposed to be fact-checking. In the end, it's all a matter of faith then. You either have faith that their experts are being truthful, or you have faith that we are. Ask your gut, which version feels more truthful? And this explanation describes some of the trust issues news consumers have when they look at mainstream media versus alternative and independent media. Everyone is properly skeptical and mostly agreeing that you need to look at more than one source of news information. However, it is much more difficult to say who in the news media is truthful. because we lack trust in their investigative or research methods. Everyone has to do the research and come to their own conclusions. So as far as I know, Cory Doctorow doesn't have much more to say about media skepticism. Fortunately, academics have been studying this epistemological problem. If we want to turn the slide.
To the next one.
Oh, wait, no, sorry. You had it.
Okay.
In 2019, Emily Van Duyn and Jessica Collier set out to study how elite discourse surrounding fake news may influence individual perceptions of real news. Through this experiment, they explored the effects of elite discourse about fake news on the public's evaluation of news media. Results show that exposure to elite discourse about fake news leads to lower levels of trust in the media and less accurate identification of real news. Before I explain the study, I think it's helpful to understand the difference between media skepticism and media nihilism. These definitions come from Van Duyn and Collier. These definitions alone are good prompts for discussion. I encourage my students to think long and hard about them. Media skepticism is defined as the perception that journalists are not fair and objective in their reports, that they do not always tell the whole story, and that they would sacrifice accuracy and precision for personal and commercial gains. Media nihilism is a skewed perception of news media that assumes falsehood even in the face of truth. I also like to add in the researchers' working definition of media elite because it's one of the controlling variables in the study. Also, students are quite familiar with these talking heads and like to talk about their role in the news landscape. So media elite can be kind of defined as politicians, higher level government officials, journalists, some activists, and many kinds of experts and policy specialists, usually that join in and talk to journalists about various issues. So participants were recruited using Amazon's Mechanical Turk and randomly assigned to one of 4 conditions in which they were exposed to one of 2 sets of tweets from media elites. Participants were then exposed to either real or fake news articles. And finally, researchers asked these participants to identify real or fake news articles. Here's a slightly more detailed explanation of these treatments. The first variable, elite discourse about fake news, was manipulated by exposing participants to tweets about either fake news, the priming treatment, or the federal budget, which was our control treatment. The tweets used in this study were generated by researchers and not real. To make the tweets realistic, some of them included cues about certain groups, like National Public Radio or Sierra Club. And each condition contained 9 tweets from elites, including 3 journalists, 3 politicians or political representatives, and 3 activists. To avoid the confounding effects of race and gender, names and thumbnail pictures reflected white male elites, and each tweet indicated that it was a verified account with the blue check mark. After the tweet treatment, participants were placed into one of 2 conditions where they received either all real news articles or all fake news articles, and were then asked to A, assess whether they thought the article was real or fake, and B, report the strength of that answer. All articles pertain to President Trump, not his policy positions or administration more generally. And real news articles were taken from the politics pages of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Fake articles were identified by Snopes as entirely false. In addition to these 2 treatments, all participants were given a summary to determine their trust in news media, political knowledge, and demographic information. We'll look at the conclusions of this study on the next slide.
And spoiler alert, Lisa, I accidentally advanced early to the next slide. People have already seen some of the.
Oh no.
I spoiled it.
That's okay. In a nutshell, there are 4 main conclusions to the study. Individuals who received the priming treatment reported lower levels of trust in news media than those who were not primed. Individuals primed with elite discourse about fake news identified all 3 real news articles with less accuracy than those who were not primed. And when controlling for political knowledge, the priming treatment explained 16% of the variance in total accurate identification of real news, which means that political knowledge had a significant effect on total accurate identification of real news. Individuals with more political knowledge identified real news with more accuracy than those with lower levels of political knowledge. Their fourth conclusion was that conservative ideology has no significant effect on accurate identification of real news articles. This study's results offer little evidence that ideology influences accurate identification of real news. And you'll notice that the researchers actually recruited a second sample to increase the number of conservative participants in the study, and they still came to this conclusion. And there is so much more to this study, but I can't summarize all 20 pages accurately. I would encourage you to read it closely. I think a discussion of these results with students could be eye-opening for them. One big takeaway for me as a librarian and instructor is that I need to be less inflammatory about the problem of fake news with my students and talk more about the solutions, such as being knowledgeable, trusting experts, using evaluation frameworks like lateral reading or SIFT, and teaching relevant information literacy skills. So here's a question to the audience. Does this study change your ideas about the proper role of skepticism in our media environment? You can go ahead and enter your comments into the chat.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not with a laugh. I was surprised that political ideology doesn't have much of an effect. Someone says no.
Yeah, the political ideology I think is really interesting. There have been several studies about like, are conservatives more prone to fake news than liberals? And it's often, what's the issue you're studying? And so the domain of knowledge is really important to understanding how susceptible is a person to fake news.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'll take over now. So growing up in a fake news world. So we're all living in a fake news world, right? But what if you grew up in a world that is constantly primed by talk of fake news? It's all fake news, alternative facts, and misinformation. What if that's all you've ever known? That's all you've heard your family talk about, heard your teachers talk about, heard your friends talk about. And not only are you primed to be on the constant lookout for lies in the news media, you also live in a world where all of your friends and acquaintances, and probably you too, alter the truth of who you are online. You Photoshop, you filter, you edit out the bad parts of your stories, right? So enter Gen Z. Before we start talking about Gen Z, the Zoomers and media nihilism, tell us a few words or thoughts about what do you think of when you think of Gen Z? And we have a Gen Zer in the audience, so it'd be fun to hear from all the different generations. What do you think of? What first comes to your mind when we talk about Gen Z?
TikTok. Our kids. Yeah. There's a lot of Gen Xers in this audience, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I have Gen X kids too. I have a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. Yeah.
I have one that's on the cusp. He's 7.
Okay. So Alyssa and I are both Gen Xers. I'm on the very far end, which means Gen Xers were born anywhere from the mid to late 60s. That's me. I'm right on the cusp. I'm 65, but I am firmly ideologically in Gen X. And they go to the late 70s or early 80s, and that's Alyssa. We're the latchkey kids, right? The MTV generation, the slackers. We're much more likely to have working moms, much more likely to have divorced parents than generations before us. We were born during an era where birth control was introduced, abortion was legalized, recreational drug use was prevalent. And guess what else we're known for? We are cynical. We're known for being cynical, disaffected, kind of bleak. We like independence, we like alternative music, we like indie films, anything that questions authority and truth. And guess who we gave birth to, as we can see in the chat? We gave birth to Gen Z, passed on that kind of cynical bleakness. Gen Z, or Zoomers, were born between 1997 and 2012, and they started entering college classrooms right around 2015. They're the homeland generation, the internet generation. They're digital natives, right? The first generation to have never known what it's like to live without a computer. And Gen Z, and this is what I say next, is all going to be kind of generalizations coming from studies, right? From Pew Research. So not true about all Gen Z, but generally more ethnically and racially diverse than previous generations. They're well behaved. They're better at obeying the rules. They're less risk averse than their Gen X parents. Gen Z has less incidence of teen pregnancy. They drink less. They do as many drugs, but they drink less. Puberty hits earlier, and shortly after puberty, they discover the effects of having online porn constantly available and what that means to their budding relationships, right? They're more stressed and depressed. So generally, what about Gen Z and the internet? Well, they're the first generation to be born into an information landscape of 24/7 access to the internet and mobile technology. Zoomers are almost constantly online, as anyone who's a parent of a Gen Xer knows. Zoomers are almost constantly doing things online. They're doing school online, and they spend way less time reading books. Reading is different for Gen Z. They've grown up reading on devices that present shorter bits of text in decontextualized streams, right? They receive information multimodally from text, audio, and video. They're used to Googling for quick answers and finding easy to read synopsis online. They're expert skimmer and scanners. They use social media in sophisticated ways to curate news and entertainment content, and they often mix the two, right? Gen Z students can name lots and lots of examples of algorithmic manipulation in their media landscape. They know that big tech and big corporations are constantly there, listening, watching, pushing personalized content, targeting data. Zoomers tend to have a sophisticated set of defensive practices too for navigating the internet and hiding from the algorithms if they want to. They don't always want to, because personalized content is more convenient, but if they do want to hide, they can. They know how to. They've grown up under constant surveillance from their devices. They teach each other how to hack or break out of parental or educational limitations. And cheating in school is often seen as a viable option to this generation. It's a way to jump through the hoops to show knowledge of information that they deem unreliable, biased, and useless. Educators report two big offenses from Gen Z students. Students using personal devices in class to access information online, and students downloading content and using it as their own. And in an article titled Generation Z, the Biggest Cheater Since Homer, writer Adam Renfrew said, and this was written 10 years ago in 2012, so probably even more relevant today. He said, beliefs in student integrity and cheating are at odds with the abundance of information and the speed of content delivery. We're hanging on to a world where information was behind closed doors and came with a cost. Mining for information used to be difficult and expensive. Gen Z, though, is moving relentlessly forward into an implausible world where the knowledge of all humankind is at their fingertips with a price tag that is cheap or even free. Yet the manner in which we teach and assess knowledge has not fundamentally changed. So how does Gen Z feel about their online media landscape? Project Information Literacy decided to ask focus groups of college students about their awareness and perceptions of algorithms. Qualitative information was taken from 16 focus groups involving 103 college students and 37 faculties from 8 US colleges and universities. The findings present 4 important takeaways. 1, students have an ambivalent bond with algorithm-driven platforms. 2, students use defensive practices to protect their privacy. We talked a little bit about that. 3, and this is the biggie, trust is dead for many students and skepticism lives. 4, discussions about algorithms rarely, if ever, make it into the classroom or instruction. So students have an ambivalent bond with algorithm-driven platforms. They know that platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Google push and curate their content. They don't know how the algorithms work behind the scenes, but they do know that the content they receive is personalized, biased, and creates filter bubbles. Gen Z sees itself as kind of prostrate to the internet. They don't trust the internet, especially social media. They see it as propaganda, but they can't leave it. It's how they communicate, it's how they date, it's how they shop, it's how they do school, it's how they do everything. So they have a profound ambivalence, a dark mix of resignation and indignation about the lack of privacy and the attempts at manipulating their attention and their wallets. But it's part of the deal, right? If they want to use free apps and stay in the loop, they stay on social media, they stay on the internet. They also like the convenience of personalized content. Given a choice between the two, they'd rather have this convenience than the privacy, as many of us would. But almost all students polled were still trying to figure out some way to circumvent online surveillance and shield their vulnerability. The quote at the top of the screen, it's a horrible totalitarian hellscape, but it's kind of the best we can reasonably expect, right? Which brings us to number 3 on the screen. Students use defensive practices, and I mentioned this, to protect their privacy. They enter college already knowing way more about navigating the internet than a lot of us know, and a lot of us might suspect. They know how to game algorithms, and they have a big toolbox, always growing, of defensive practices to protect their privacy. They use free apps and browser extensions to counter tracking. They use retaliatory tactics that they either invent or learn from friends to intentionally confuse algorithms. They run ad blockers, they clear cookies, they use DuckDuckGo for untracked searching. They run VPNs to shield browsing activity. They create multiple accounts on Instagram, Google, and YouTube to avoid having all of their internet activities tied to a single identity. They deliberately curate multiple selves or different accounts on different accounts that could reflect their varied interests, kind of a digital code switching. And they share information among themselves about how to get around the algorithms, how to get away from tracking, how to get away, get around the blocks at school settings. And any of us who have kids probably know about all kinds of scandals that happen when they learn how to get around the school settings on their devices. And in a quote from the algorithm study we're referencing, there's a great quote. It says, altogether, issues around choice and agency appear closely related to trust and skepticism and student suspicions about being manipulated by invisible forces. Taking a skeptical approach to all information has become a reflex for many students. So students in the current media landscape have a really hard time knowing where to place their trust. They don't trust the media. They don't trust what's put on social media with its curated content, filtered and edited to perfection. They're living in an information environment where every institution is being deconstructed and called out for long-standing lies, and rightly so. Education, the legal system, politics, economics, it's all crumbling away as biases and misinformations are being revealed. Zoomers have a difficulty knowing where to place trust when this is what they're hearing every day. They're cynical. They have too many choices in a crowded, never-ending information loop where credible news is mixed with misinformation. News and entertainment merge until you can't tell one from the other. They don't trust what they see online, anything they see online. And in some ways, they become kind of an oral culture where they share offline and they rely on talking it out with others. The only information they trust is what comes from their tightest inner circle, family, friends, a single trusted teacher. A lot of them say parents, and that's so different from our generation. Anything that came from my parents was I did not trust. So it's a big switch. As librarians working with and educating Zoomers, we have to be aware of and acknowledge and learn from Gen Z. When polled, most students said they found out from friends and relatives about algorithms and how they work. When they were asked if instructors had helped them think about how information is created and encountered and how they worked on different online platforms, most only mentioned superficial strategies. So most people instructing them just said, use DuckDuckGo so you don't get tracked, and that's it. Faculty don't address the changing information landscape. They're more likely to address societal concerns, mourning the loss of our common culture, and they talk about to Gen Z about what they're losing instead of working with Gen Z to see how they can make their experience with their own information landscape better, richer, and more relevant. One important finding showed faculty thought that a greater attention to generic critical thinking early on in the 4 years of college would prepare students to navigate their current environment, but most assumed that critical thinking skills taught traditionally were sufficient. But students seem to draw no connection between what they're asked to do in school and how they actually live in the information world, trying to navigate that landscape. They see no connection between what they learn in school and practices they need for everyday life. The information they need for school assignments just doesn't have anything to do with life out there. So they joked in the surveys about the outdated advice that elders give them about the internet in their courses. And most students believe that they knew way more than their teachers about algorithmic technologies. They saw no value in having their teachers address technology since teachers are clueless. Okay, so reading, comprehension, synthesizing information, extrapolating. Let's talk about that. Allison Head, in an article called Reading in the Age of Distrust, writes, many instructors consider reading assignments the fulcrum of deep learning, but students see them as a means to a more obvious end, passing a quiz, contributing to a group project, or earning a good grade. And you'll see on the top of the screen a quote that's from my daughter's best friend. So I asked people I knew, kids I knew, how they felt. And this is from Courtney, and Courtney is a student at the U, does great in college. She's in her junior year, and that was a quote from her. So when Gen Z enters college, they're less prepared to work with large bodies of text. A 2013 project information literacy study found that more than 1/3 of students felt unprepared to read the text they were assigned by faculty and the materials they sought out independently to complete their assignments. This generation struggles to understand what authors mean in long text. They aren't sure what to retain and how to integrate information from longer passages. They struggle with seeing patterns, with making connections between texts, and they're reluctant to read a variety of sources to find solutions. Gen Z students come to deeper reading with a skepticism that they've developed from their skimming and scanning online. Polled students said that skepticism about news and information are baked into their psyches, and skepticism about all reading follows. Barbara Pfister discusses, again, in the age of reading in the age of distrust. She says many more get into trouble when they don't know the differences between deep reading and snap assessment about what to read, when they don't have a reading list prepared by an expert to guide them. Few learn how to look for cues to see what to read in the stream of options, and then take the time and effort to read something carefully and deeply, absorbing arguments and making connections that go beyond cherry picking a quote to add to a course paper. Okay, so after all that, that's kind of a big old wordy nutshell of Gen Z and their relationship to information and online and reading. What challenges do you think librarians and instructors face teaching Gen Z? What challenges have you come up against as you're working with Gen Z students when trying to teach them information literacy skills?
Choosing a topic, right? Or narrowing that topic down to something actually manageable.
Mm-hmm.
That can be tough. Well, there might be more. Maybe we've lost people.
Yeah.
They're getting coffee right now. Patience with library tools,
Yeah.
motivation.
Yep.
Definitely. Particularly that patience piece, right? I have to go to how many different databases and try to look at stuff? That's weird.
Yeah.
Getting off Google. Yes.
Yes, not just searching Google. Yep. Okay, so intergenerational discussion. What are we talking about when we talk about that? Okay, we can help students by honoring what they already know and to encourage them to practice critical thinking, analysis, and evaluation on the information they see in their own media landscape. So the skills we want them to know for school and school learning, teach them those skills on TikTok and what they're looking at on TikTok and Snapchat and all of that. Tinder, let's practice some evaluation on Tinder. Get them to move from being passive victims of the internet to active creators of knowledge. So we need to get them to question how information works, how information finds them, how single pieces of information live within a complex system of information, how they can draw on their own strengths and experiences to develop skills to determine credibility, usefulness, trust, right? There's an article that actually sparked this whole idea of wanting to think about how we teach Gen Z information literacy skills. And it's called Dismantling the Evaluation Framework. It's a fantastic article, and the authors articulate what I was noticing in my information literacy classes. They said that current evaluation tactics of crap and sift provide little defense against the networked efforts of organizations that flood students' feeds and timelines and search results. And all of ours, right? Crap doesn't really work in this networked social media landscape. And the article says we need to stop treating the searcher as agent, acting upon found information, kind of the here's what I found, what do I think of it model. Instead, we have to treat information as the agent, acting upon the searcher. We have to acknowledge that information has agency now. It is active, it's targeted, it's capable of influencing action. So the searcher has to be proactive. They have to consider each source while evaluating information contextually through its relationship to other sources and to the user. We need to invite students to draw on their own experiences and insights and encourage peer-to-peer learning, right? Develop and share strategies to better prepare them for reading this new world. Strategies they use in their social media, bring those strategies of figuring things out into their academic world, and vice versa. Bring the critical thinking and the analysis to their outside world. And we need to demystify reading. We need to invite students into reading, show them how to do it. We think that that's something that they're learning when they're in elementary school, and we think we don't need to focus on that anymore, but we need to invite them in, have them critique what they read, show them how to read for comprehension, include questions with reading assignments, ask students to connect academic reading to their own life, teach them how to read with empathy as opposed to reading for tearing down or tearing apart. And over time, they'll create their own matrix of trusted sources. If they do all of this, they'll start to realize that they can trust some sources. It just takes some digging. One of the most important things we can do for our Gen Z students is to defend the concept of truth. We need to invite them into the world of inquiry and the world of belief. Daniel Schmachtenberger is a founding member of the Consilience Project, an organization aimed at improving public sense-making and dialogue. He gave an amazing talk. I recommend it to everyone. It's called "If We Don't Fix Sense-Making, We Won't Survive." And in it, he says how to understand the narrative landscape better, to seek empiricism better, to be able to not reject or take entire narratives, to be able to look for partial truths, be able to aggregate signal across space, to be more comfortable with uncertainty. We can encourage Gen Z students and patrons to look for these partial truths that Schmachtenberger is talking about. We can get them to contribute to sharing and be stewards of the information commons instead of passively accepting it. They get to create it. They get to create the information commons. We need to encourage them to seek to understand those with whom they don't agree, right? Some of us expressed shock that in the study Alyssa was mentioning that liberals are just as likely to be confounded by fake information, right? So we need to remember that about ourselves, that everybody is vulnerable. And we need to, instead of doubling down on our own beliefs, get to talk with other people who have other beliefs. So we need to move away from this nihilism, this media nihilism, and get our students to do that. Still have media skepticism, but couple it with fact and truth finding, a toolbox of things to do to dig for the facts, and a willingness to dialogue. And lastly, we need to give Gen Z students hope. Remember what Alyssa said at the start of our presentation. It kind of echoes Schmachtenberger. She said, critical dialogue is a way for us to name our oppression, to see reality more clearly, and to exercise our imagination so we can see a future that's better. If we can't dream the new reality, we won't get there. So how do we get students to exercise their imagination and operate with hope? Get them to ask questions. Again, I'm quoting a lot of articles, but they're just so good. And there was an article written last week by Barbara Pfister for the Project Information Literacy that I swear she wrote just for this presentation. It's called Principled Uncertainty, Why Learning to Ask Good Questions Matters More Than Finding Answers. And she reports that a large majority of recent graduates from US universities and colleges report that they felt that college failed to prepare them to ask questions of their own. A national survey of over 1,500 recent graduates found that while most respondents felt college had helped them learn how to find, how to evaluate, and how to analyze information, only a minority, less than a third, believed that education had prepared them to formulate questions of their own. Pfister urges us as educators and librarians to encourage a practice of curiosity. She says, coping with our information landscape requires that we are comfortable with what we cannot know for sure, able to approach uncertainty with curiosity, and have a toolkit of ethical practices for exploration. An earlier Project Information Literacy study provides additional context. In interviews, employers in a range of industries said that recent graduates lacked a tolerance for ambiguity and the ability to make use of the process of letting new questions flow out of an initial question, rather than hurrying to find an answer. So what we can do as educators is encourage an ethical practice of curiosity, not just for times of uncertainty like COVID, not just on social media, but everywhere as an everyday habit. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing that inhibits curiosity for Gen Zers? How can we pair curiosity with a good, robust ethical practice that leads to creating, evaluating, and sharing information with integrity? And in an already deeply divided society with a fractured media landscape, how can we be prepared for the ways these ambiguous moments of not knowing can be weaponized to cause confusion and undermine democracy itself? And then I'm going to close with a quote from Barbara Pfister from that great article. She says, the job of information literacy is to help students embrace their role in the collective effort of stumbling toward understanding, to have the confidence to ask questions that may not have easy answers, and to have ready at hand the ethical tools to inquire with integrity. Okay, and that's it. So we will open with any comments or questions, or I'll stop sharing so I can see everybody. And does anyone have any question or any thoughts? What do you do to encourage Gen Z?
And I just wanted to say that I started sharing. We spend a lot of this presentation arguing that we need to dialogue with students. We need to talk to them about social media and algorithms. And we didn't have a lot of time to talk through all of the tools and all of the things we think are effective. And so we're giving you a handout for the presentation we would do if we had 5 hours. And I put it in the chat, but we recommend some dialogic frameworks that you could use to introduce conversation rather than argumentation into your classrooms. Recommended reading, and a lot of these readings are what we quote in this presentation about information literacy. We're huge fans of Project Information Literacy. And then we give you places to look for skill building activities that help with social media research and taking in information from various parts of our media landscape and our social media landscape. So these would be kind of beyond the academic toolbox kind of places. And then finally, we give librarians and instructors, people we presume to be older elders within this intergenerational dialogue, longer form reading about social media and algorithms and search engines. And we give shorter articles and films to discuss with students, or your children or anybody who's younger than you, to try to just open up dialogue about how is our information environment working on us and what can we do about it.
Oh, and Emily asked, we mentioned SIFT and lateral reading. Are those included in the handout, or do you have other recommendations for information on them?
Yeah, so I think Rebecca and I would both recommend like starting a Checkology account and working through some of the exercises there. There you'll learn a lot about lateral reading, and then
it's amazing.
Yeah. I would start there. A lot of these other sites will talk about media literacy, and but Checkology really has these like skills building activities that you can work on that you can share with students or younger people.
Let me see if I can find a link to SIFT to mentioned in one of the articles, but let me see if I can find a link for it.
Cool. Are there other questions, or does anyone have any other cool things to share with the group about encouraging dialogue or teaching next generation?
Oh, Paul, yeah, Paul says, I'm interested in how information literacy practice can connect to civic engagement. I, Paul, get the joy this semester of teaching, and you taught information literacy at our school. We've kind of morphed our information literacy class into a 3-credit class now with different themes, and I'm teaching one with a information literacy with an ethics and civic engagement focus. And so it's brand new, but I have students doing really fun assignments, and we kind of morph it from, you know, like find this resource, analyze it, and it's find this resource to help you engage in a civic manner. So I have students, I have one student that I talked to yesterday who's doing this great project. She wants to change the message from AmeriCorps. She's been an AmeriCorps volunteer, and she wants to change the message to students who are have financial needs, because she found that it helped her with cultural capital, and actually the pay that she got from AmeriCorps she could live on. So she wants to, and she's doing this whole thing about volunteerism and how you change your message about trying to get people to do volunteerism depending on who the target audience is. And so she's doing great work. So yeah, I'm interested in it too. If you have any ideas about your own ideas about combining information literacy practices to civic engagement, I'd love to hear them, because this is a brand new class, but I'm amazed at how engaged students are with using those skills to change something in their own landscape.
Yeah, there is a question from Matt about how lateral reading relates to encouraging curiosity. And I guess I would go back and forth on this. So lateral reading is kind of a fact-checking device that journalists use and professional fact checkers use, where they will read something, but instead of reading the whole thing and try to do like a classic analysis using kind of old-fashioned evaluation where you say, who's the author? When I read this, does it sound authoritative? They don't even bother with that. They look at it, they look for facts, and they start like checking other tabs on their browser for the facts. And it's fact checking while you're reading something. And it's a very, I mean, so when I started trying to do lateral reading, I feel like it's like this super decontextualized way of reading, because you're jumping tabs to try to verify facts within a body of work, and you're jumping tabs to try to figure out, is this person real? Like, this person on this website claims to be an expert or authoritative, but if I Google them, if I look at them, are they really, right? So it's more of a 21st century fact checking strategy that you can apply to information.
Yeah, you ask a great question, because how are we going to get students to do this, right? If it's, how are we going to convince them if it's not something that does encourage curiosity? And really, it's more work, right? It's a lot more work to read laterally, to find a bunch of different resources. And you might serendipitously find something that you're really interested in, right? But in and of itself, I wouldn't say that lateral reading engages curiosity or encourages curiosity. Unless you say, you know, look at, I do it with our classes. I think Alyssa and I both do this, where we say, look it up from a different perspective. We use All Sides News a lot, or I do. I don't know if you do, Alyssa, but you can find news articles on All Sides, and we link to it on our handout, that are from, you know, publications that are lean towards the left, lean toward the right, and are in the center. So we'll encourage them to, if you know, find articles from at least left and right, and hopefully center too. So that kind of lateral reading, I've had students really engage with that and be like, oh, I didn't even realize that I agreed with this part of this thing I think is opposite of me, you know. So that that encourages curiosity.
Yeah, and it also it shows that there's more diversity on lots of topics. Like vaccination is not a binary, it's actually a very gray thing. With COVID-19, and I'm not saying like I'm an anti-vaxxer, I'm not. But the questions about vaccination are actually more nuanced than what the left covers. Like the left will just very much cover over and over again. It's a bunch of people who won't get vaccinated, they won't vaccinate their kids, and they don't really have valid reasons why. They're not listening to the science. But there's actually more nuance. Like there was a doctor who is very much in favor of vaccination, but for his 20-year-old son, he says, you know, I don't think he should get a booster. He should definitely get the vaccine, but I think he might be better off, because he's young and healthy, just getting the vaccine once and then getting COVID. That might be better, but you know, that's
all kinds of things with that. I had a student doing their research on anti-vaxxers, and was like, I had no idea that I'm lumping everyone into anti-vaxxers, but there are anti-vaxxers and then there are vaccine hesitants. You know, so they find out all these when they do lateral reading, especially from a viewpoint not their own. They come to all these, they find all these things where like, oh, it's not black and white like I originally thought it was. There's a lot of gray in here, and I might find a little part of that, you know, in that gray part from that white when I thought black, you know. So
yeah, and it's also a way to build empathy, right? So it's a way to say that even though I don't agree with the other side, I don't see them as stupid. I don't see them as irresponsible. I don't see them as other to the point where I dehumanize them, right? And I think that is really part of why we want to encourage this ability to be curious and to also be able to dialogue and not just argue. A lot of our media landscape is argumentative. Not only is it argumentative, it argues in very small echo chambers. Like MSNBC will definitely have arguments about vaccination, but they will bring on their experts, their talking heads, and they'll have a very narrow discussion. Same with Fox News, right? They will have a very narrow discussion with their talking heads. And nary do the twain have to get together and really talk about it.
All right. It looks like Jenny Sipple put a link to a podcast in the chat.
Thanks, Jenny.
So if anyone wants to grab that, and then also don't forget, Rebecca put a great link in there in the chat, as well as the handout and the evaluation. So before you log off, be sure to grab some of those things in the chat. And then it looks like our time is up. So I just want to thank Alyssa and Rebecca so much. This was really informative and interesting. Definitely gave me a lot to think about. So thank you all. And this will be, this was recorded, and so it will be posted on the Level Up YouTube site within the next day or two.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, Olivia still doesn't see the.
Olivia, I can send it to you via email if you want to direct message me an email, or maybe there's a way Beth and the Minitex people can.
Yep, I can actually, if you want to just, I can just download it here and then I can send it out to all of the registrants.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
It would
you.
be part 2 of our presentation if we had time. All right.
All right,
Thank you,
thanks,
Kim.
everyone.
Thank you.